everyone, welcome to Clinical Physiology. From today, we'll step into the world of cells. We'll discuss the physiological functions of body cells. By the end of this chapter, students should be able to explain mechanism of different types of transport across cell membrane, compare resting potentials and action potentials, describe excitation, contraction, coupling in skeletal muscle, explain mechanism of skeletal muscle contraction, and predict the consequences caused by abnormal cellular mechanism. Let's start off with the mechanism of membrane transport. First, let's look at a case. In a routine checkup, Mrs. Lee, a 45-year-old CFO, was found to have an elevated blood sugar, and her urine test was positive for glucose. How did glucose get into her urine? You'll be able to answer this question after we finish this session. Here are the learning objectives today. At the end of this session, you should be able to compare active transport and passive transport. Use examples to explain mechanisms of main types of transport across cell membrane. Predict the consequences caused by disordered membrane transport with an example. So what is membrane transport? It refers to the movement of substances across the cell membrane. Why do we need this? Membrane transport allows nutrients into cells and waste to be eliminated. Ion concentration gradients can be maintained to ensure normal cellular electrical activities. In a word, membrane transport is crucial for maintenance of homeostasis. There are two types of substance transport across cell membrane: passive transport and active transport. Passive transport moves substances down concentration gradient. It does not need energy. Active transport is the movement of substances against concentration gradient, which requires energy. Let's look at passive transport first. Passive transport is also called diffusion. It includes simple diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. Lipid-soluble substances such as the oxygen, carbon dioxide, alcohol, and fat-soluble vitamins diffuse through the lipid layer directly. This is simple diffusion. Water and other lipid-insoluble substances move through protein channels. And next time we'll discuss ion channel in detail. Another type of diffusion is facilitated diffusion. The word facilitate means to help or assist. Facilitated diffusion requires carriers. It is also called carrier-mediated diffusion. Then, what are the carriers? Carriers are transport proteins located in the cell membrane. They are the vehicles, the shuttles of cells. They carry substances across cell membrane. For example, a carrier protein picks up a molecule of glucose outside the cells and then brings them into the cell. By doing so, blood glucose level can be maintained within normal range. Carrier-mediated diffusion is more rapid than simple diffusion. However, carrier-mediated transport is limited by the number of carriers. When all the glucose carriers are occupied, they are said to be saturated, and glucose transport is at its maximum rate. When the number of glucoses exceeds the capacity of carrier transport, glucose will not be transferred efficiently. Excess glucose remains in the blood leading to elevated blood glucose. Now, let's talk about osmosis. Osmosis is a special type of diffusion. It is the movement of water through a selectively permeable membrane from a solution with low solute concentration to a solution with high solute concentration. In other words, water will always tend to move to an area where there is more dissolved material, such as salt or sugar. For instance, solution A contains more water and solution B has more solutes. For example, the sodium. The membrane in between solution A and solution B is only permeable to water. So, water is free to pass through the membrane. Sodium, however, cannot pass through the membrane, and this creates pressure in the solution, known as osmotic pressure. This is a very important concept in physiology. We'll discuss it in detail in Chapter 8 of this course. Now let's move to active transport. Active transport is the movement of substances against the chemical or electrical or electrochemical gradient. That is to say, substances are moved from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. This uphill transport requires both carriers and energy. Active transport can be divided into two types according to the source of the energy: primary active transport and secondary active transport. In primary active transport, energy is obtained directly from breakdown of ATP. A typical example of primary active transport is the sodium-potassium ATPase. It is present in all cell membranes. As its name implies, the sodium-potassium ATPase is an enzyme. It is also known as sodium-potassium pump. Each time, this pump can move 2 potassium ions and 3 sodium ions against their concentration gradients. And by doing so, the sodium and the potassium concentration differences across the cell membrane are maintained. And once sodium channels are opened, sodium ions will rush into the cell down concentration gradient. And this provides the basis for secondary active transport of many nutrients and ions. Then you may ask, what is secondary active transport? The term secondary here refers to something happening because of the primary one. In secondary active transport, sodium ions diffuse into the cells by means of carriers. At the same time, some other substances bind to the same carriers and move across cell membrane. So you see, secondary active transport provides a free ride for another substance. It does not consume ATP directly. If the substance is to move in the same direction as the sodium ions, the condition is called co-transport or symport. Glucose in proximal renal tubules is co-transported with sodium ions. In counter-transport, substances are moved in the opposite direction of sodium ions. It is also called exchange or antiport. Examples include calcium-sodium exchange or counter-transport. Now let's go back to the case of Mrs. Li. Why did she have an elevated blood sugar and glucose in the urine? From the viewpoint of membrane transport, elevated blood sugar means that her blood glucose level exceeds the capacity of protein carriers to move glucose into the interior of the cells. Thus, excess glucose remains in the blood, And when this elevated blood glucose exceeds the transport maximum of the renal tubule, glucose cannot be reabsorbed completely and therefore appears in the urine. In summary, substances are transported across cell membrane by passive and active transport mechanisms. Passive transport does not need energy. It moves substances down concentration gradient. Active transport conveys substances against concentration gradient. It requires both carriers and energy. Next time, we'll discuss the functions of ion channels. Thank you, and see you next time.